St. Helena accused of shooting a 16-year-old classmate may have been indicted on a charge of second-degree murder, but we were not allowed into the court hearing and denied access to that information. Katie Easter has an in-depth look at why a deputy kept the press out, even though state laws may require it.
Michael, I went to the juvenile court and I meet with the state law in my hand that grants access to the court, even though the case involves a minor, because he's involved in a violent crime. I was told that law only pertains to the trial, but attorneys tell me that is not correct. A week after 16-year-old Vernon Gordon Jr. was shot to death outside of his school in Greensburg, his accused killer, 14-year-old Christopher Williams, is being held in a juvenile detention center. Sources say Williams was being bullied and was afraid nothing would be done if he went to school administrators. In this now deleted GoFundMe, someone claiming to be Williams says he was involved in an altercation trying to defend himself and his siblings. He is facing several charges, including second-degree murder and aggravated second-degree battery. On Thursday, Williams went in front of 21st District Judge Blair Edwards. Indications are that hearing looked to establish probable cause, which could have led to an indictment.
Unlike the records themselves, the documents that are not available to the public is allowed to attend these proceedings. That's more consistent with what we have with adult court.
State laws prevent the release of information on what happened inside the court. Therefore, a reporter must attend the hearing to know what happened and what is next. But on Thursday morning, we were denied access, even after presenting Article 879, which states all proceedings in a juvenile delinquency case involving a crime of violence shall be open to the public. Crimes of violence include both second-degree murder and aggravated second-degree battery.
Code Article 879 extends that to certain, high risk, we would call it, cases in juvenile court that have higher profile, higher consequence issues.
A Tangipahoa Parish Sheriff's deputy explained that a room full of attorneys said it only pertains to the trial, but that's not how everyone sees it. Certain cases, they say, established at Thursday's hearing shouldn't have been in secret.
The Chicago Tribune case stands for the proposition that newspapers, media companies, television stations do have a right. They are the public. They have a right to attend these proceedings, and they cannot be closed out of proceedings under Article 879.
I spoke on the phone today with the district attorney. He did not deny that there was a mistake, but said it's up to the court to determine who's allowed in. We made several phone calls to the court and the judge's chambers, and as of news time, we have not.
Que se encuentran en este espacio y inclusive detectamos unos túneles. Ese sistema de túneles hemos impedido una fuga masiva y hemos controlado todos los privados de libertad de manera conjunta para garantizar la vida y la paz del pueblo venezolano.
Bien, información importante, vicepresidente. Entonces, la información en este momento, la situación está ya 100% controlada.
Los órganos de seguridad ciudadana trabajando mancomunadamente y faltará poco para que nosotros podamos...
Las personas que estaban aquí son privados de libertad que cometieron un delito, se enfrentaron a la ley y, bueno, como tal, también tienen sus derechos, por supuesto, y nosotros hacemos respeto máximo a sus derechos. Esto ha sido una operación donde hemos garantizado la vida y la tranquilidad, bueno, de las personas en las poblaciones también adyacentes. Es decir, hemos logrado garantizar la seguridad de los privados de libertad y ahora ellos van a otro centro.
Todo el Estado venezolano y la Fuerza Armada junto al pueblo, o el pueblo unido, hemos adquirido una gran victoria. Esta gran victoria para transformar completamente todos estos espacios.
A case that goes beyond crime and punishment. Several state prison employees could soon find themselves locked up in the prison system for which they worked.
Evidence and testimony presented in court has been graphic and inflammatory against the MDOC employees. But should they go to trial on involuntary manslaughter charges? That's the decision a judge will make next Monday. Let's bring in investigative reporter Karen Drew. She's been uncovering details on this case for months.
38-year-old Jonathan Lancaster was nearing the end of a 9-year state prison sentence for armed robbery. But instead of going home to his family, Lancaster died a horrible death in prison. Now, 8 prison employees face serious criminal charges. And Jonathan's sister says Michigan's unusually cruel prison culture is also to blame.
I want them to experience a little bit of what he did.
6 Michigan Department of Corrections employees could soon be on trial for involuntary manslaughter, 2 on trial for felony misconduct. Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel says the actions of the prison employees, including the warden, led to Jonathan Lancaster's death in 2019.
They abused him, and then they mentally, on top of it, the mental torment.
For days, a judge listened to testimony about what really happened behind bars to Jonathan Lancaster.
One of the other observations I made is that he had dry, cracked lips, and so based on what Inspector Contreras had advised me was that he was on a hunger strike, so I was certainly concerned that dehydration and starvation was a possibility.
The MSP detective who investigated Jonathan Lancaster's death took the stand. Sergeant Jeff Marker described the deceased inmate's starved and withered condition. So, how did we get here? We sat down with Jonathan's sister for some background. Danielle Dunn says her brother Jonathan had an altercation with another inmate and was moved to Adair County Correctional Facility in the UP. At Adair, Jonathan was put into indefinite solitary confinement. His condition quickly deteriorated.
Imagine a room the size of your bathroom with no windows, concrete block walls, and those spaces can get up to 100 degrees in the summertime because they're not air conditioned. So imagine that with no stimulus, and guess what? Mental health breakdown, which is so common.
Mentally broken, Jonathan stopped eating and drinking. He lost a quarter of his body weight, but instead of getting medical help, according to court testimony, Jonathan was strapped to a chair.
I just noticed that he was extremely skinny, that his hips were protruding.
According to the autopsy, Jonathan died of dehydration. The prison warden, assistant warden, and several nurses all charged with involuntary manslaughter.
And I could see his ribs, kind of sunken in eyes.
And that's not all.
His autopsy report shows the bruises, the cuts to his face.
Danielle believes that although neglect and abuse by prison employees caused her brother's death, solitary confinement was a big contributing factor.
The UN calls it sanctioned torture. Michigan sees it differently.
Unlike some states, Michigan has no restrictions on the legal use of solitary confinement. And Danielle wants that to change.
We have over 2,400 people in Michigan today who are sitting in solitary confinement, quote unquote, segregation cells, who are experiencing these things today without proper diagnosis, without proper medical health treatment.
The Adair County judge is expected to announce on Monday whether 6 of the prison employee defendants will indeed face a jury trial for involuntary manslaughter in Jonathan Lancaster's death. We'll let you know what happens. Back to you.
Hey, Karen, thank you. And this is a case the Local 4 investigative team has closely followed. To see more of Karen Drew's reports, head to our website, click on.
From the state's juvenile jails, the ACLU is stepping in.
Wave News troubleshooter Natalia Martinez joins us with an update to her latest investigation.
Patience is running out while the number of claims keeps adding up. I talked with the ACLU, who says change and accountability will have to come from the outside.
The ACLU of Kentucky is now asking the feds to step in after numerous allegations of deplorable and abusive conditions at the Adair County Juvenile Detention facility.
So what we did recently was submit an intake request to the Department of Justice, who has more abilities than we do, frankly, to assess the conditions, start an investigation, maybe negotiate a consent decree or bring a lawsuit on their own.
For the past year, Wave News troubleshooters exposed allegations of assaults and claims that children were not being fed as a form of punishment, locked in their cells for weeks on end, received zero schooling, and were not allowed to take showers, something we found staff was making fun of on social media. The information gathered through open records requests, leaked documents, and a lawsuit.
Do you have anything to say?
Allegations we tried to ask the director of the facility, Tanya Burton, about.
Do you not take responsibility for the problems that have happened in Adair?
It's sort of more of the same. These systems are very difficult to hold accountable politically, legally, by bringing lawsuits. They're difficult nuts to crack. And so I think the important thing is for folks like us to, make as much noise as we can, because there are horrible conditions.
When I reached out to the DOJ, they said they can't confirm or deny an investigation. We know that they are aware of the allegations. However, we don't know if they've actually opened a case. As for these investigations, I'm still waiting on a batch of emails to see who else knew about sexual allegations at the Campbell facility and what they actually did about it. Natalia Martinez.
For attempted murder and other charges for apparently an unprovoked attack against a New York City Department of Corrections officer who was beaten unconscious. According to the Bronx District Attorney, back on August 23rd, 31-year-old Rashidi Smith went up to the officer who was at his post and allegedly punched him multiple times. Then investigators say Smith slammed the victim's head against a chair and concrete wall multiple times. Smith is due back in court in November.
Teens are carrying guns, and also more of them are involved in stealing vehicles. That's according to the Adair County Juvenile Probation Department.
Our Patty Santos was there as the San Antonio Police Chief, William McManus, and Juvenile District Court Judge William Cruz Shaw talked openly about tragic realities involving teens that they're dealing with.
These kids have lived lives that we would never understand.
It may be hard to imagine how teens wind up in the juvenile court system, but Judge William Cruz Shaw gets it. He sees it every day.
We expect them to handle situations like adults, but we have to keep in mind they're still children.
Tonight, he spoke at a town hall meeting at St. Mary's University. He told people about kids from troubled homes, those who end up in jail for days because they can't get bail. He says others are rejected by their family.
It's a very complicated issue. We're not going to solve this thing overnight, but we definitely have to stay involved.
The 436 Juvenile District Court judge says crime data is changing. According to the Adair County Juvenile Probation Department, more kids are armed and stealing vehicles. From January to August of this year, the number of youth involved in auto burglaries and vehicle break-ins went from 59 to 174. And teens caught with guns went from 16 last year to 29 so far this year.
Kids taking guns to school and either having that gun at school or threatening to shoot the school.
He says some kids are posting their crimes online just for likes, but thankfully some community members want to step in.
You need to be a parent that knows where your children are. Who are they hanging out with? What is in their social media?
This educator says stopping juvenile crime should matter to everyone.
We're all parents, we're grandparents, and so far in education as well. What can we do? This is a problem for the village.
And Judge Shaw says families should set boundaries for kids, hold them accountable, and give them a curfew. He says, unfortunately, if the kids don't get the help they need now, they might end up in jail as adults.
Hey everybody, so I have some big news to share. We are announcing the creation of the first ever White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. And we are doing this work in large part because of the activism, the organizing, the marching, the voting of all of you leaders, be it students, parents, teachers, community leaders, who understand that living free from gun violence should be a right. So we're going to work on this together. We're going to continue to fight for reasonable gun safety laws and for the ability of all people to live their best lives free from fear, free from violence. Thank you for all that you have done and continue to do.